In this interview, I will be speaking to the amazing Emily Long. Like, words can't describe how remarkable I think she is. I first met Emily at the GroundWork Youth Summit, I think back in July or August now. We shared a panel together, and that was the first time that I had heard her mental health story. And as soon as she told me what she went through, I had to interview her. I wanted to make a video with her, and we're lucky enough to have made that happen. This will be a 2-part interview because I just didn't want to cut the video for 10 minutes. So this video will be part 1, and next week I'll post part 2. But I hope you enjoy this conversation with Emily Long. You said that it all kind of started for you when you were 15 years old. And that's when you started to become more aware of your mental health and things are changing slightly. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that started?
So I wouldn't say I was necessarily even aware of it when I was 15. That's kind of when, looking back, like I can retrospectively see signals. I was in quite a difficult relationship at the time. I very much sort of started being very emotional about things that just didn't make sense to necessarily be emotional about, or overreacting to things, but not in a, I don't know, your sort of typical, the girlfriend overreacts kind of way, in like a very, feeling genuinely just really, really distraught at things that just didn't matter, or even just sort of feeling generally low about things that did matter, but you shouldn't necessarily constantly have to feel low about. And so retrospectively, I can kind of see that that wasn't just me being like a hysterical person or like a bad person that overreacts a lot. Like, with what I know now, that was a sign that things weren't okay. At the time, I just thought I was like the crazy girlfriend.
Yeah. You obviously discovered that and you were going through all these changes, but when did you decide to get help?
So I got to a point where I can't go it alone, and so I went and saw my GP.
What did your GP tell you? Because when you said this story at GroundWork when you gave a speech to staff and colleagues, and I was truly shocked when you said what your GP said. So what did they say to you?
So the first time I went to see them, she looked at me and she was really worried. You could tell that she was really worried. You know, it was almost like that kind of maternal shock that people get when they want to, you know, look after somebody. But she looked at me and she was like, I don't know how I can help you. I'm more of a medical doctor. And at this point I was just awe-stricken, because even I knew that was still part of her job.
Yeah, like you're to do with health, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And then I went back to see her again because like nothing had already happened. She tried to refer me to CAMS, but I was like a couple months off my 18th birthday, so they wouldn't take me. And nothing had happened, so I went back. And then she was like, we were just chatting about what I'm doing in the future, etc. I told her about my offer from Oxford, and she was like, are you really sure that you want to go? I was like, yeah, I want to go. She's like, well, it's just very intense. And I mean, I knew that.
How did you take that?
It was, I came out feeling really disheartened on kind of 2 levels, probably. Number one is like, here's this person who's supposed to know what they're talking about. He's supposed to like really have an idea of what is happening and of the position that I'm in, who is basically saying, I don't think you're going to be able to do the thing that you've like planned to do for the past 2 years. I don't think that you're going to be able to do the thing that your future is kind of set on. You know, and when you have somebody who you think knows more than you telling you those things, then you kind of just have to take it to heart and believe it in a lot of ways. Eventually I obviously didn't, and I'm still going, but you know, that's really disheartening. But then obviously it is probably far worse when she was saying that she didn't know how to help me, because that was the whole reason that I went, and you end up with this idea that, okay, well, this is never going to end then.
And I also imagine it makes you feel quite isolated as well, because you're like, I must be the only one. Like, if you can't help me, then what else is there? Almost like there's no hope in a sense. Did that make you feel like that? Or
yeah, definitely. When I only went there because I got onto the point where I decided I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. So then if I'm
you're going for support.
Yeah.
And then when they say to you, oh, we can't support you, well, that's like, well, what's next?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a really interesting question that I got from one of your articles, and you say that the language of mental illness holds so much nuance that to try to accurately describe what is wrong with you was nigh on impossible. So what do you mean by that? Because I was amazed when you actually explained this well. It really resonated with me at the time.
I guess it's just because, like, mental health borders in this weird space of being medical and personal and concrete and abstract and all those kinds of things at the same time. My illness is probably most accurately described as having traits of borderline personality disorder. The first time I saw my psychiatrist, actually, he probably nailed it on the head, if I can remember the exact words that he used. He called it a post-traumatic emotional dysregulation syndrome.
What?
Which is a lot of big words.
What's that?
Yeah. And the reason that he phrased it this way, and that's kind of where everything becomes a bit of a grey area, is that actually, like, the word illness has a very specific medical meaning.
Yeah.
It has to be completely biological, basically. So you're looking at things that have, like, really strong basis in genetics, mostly for mental health, which what I was displaying didn't. So technically it's not an illness. And then equally, my symptoms didn't necessarily display themselves in a way that perfectly fit the criteria for diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. So I then was completely, like, detached from being able to get a diagnosis at all, which is a really difficult space to be in, because I knew that I was struggling, just as much as any number of people who have a diagnosed mental health problem. Sometimes more, sometimes less, as is the way that it all works. But it is very difficult then to be able to access, like, external help, or to be able to feel like you're being taken seriously if you can't say, this is what it is. And it also...
It makes you confused, right?
Yeah, because, okay, well, like, if it's not an illness, if it's not something that's wrong in my brain, then is that just, like, me being a bad person? Or,
Which I think is the biggest problem. Like, whenever anyone goes through challenges like yourself, or through any type of mental illness, or even just, like, mental health problems, we all go downhill, we feel like, oh, I'm just weak, or I'm a bad person, or... my friends they're going through this, so, like, why am I? And you start asking yourself these questions or doubts, but you don't actually associate it that it's not your fault. It's out of your control. There's nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can do is accept, acknowledge it, and try and work forwards towards it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And when you have symptoms that can be sort of extreme versions of, like, negative aspects of people's personalities that just exist anyway, having a short temper, or sometimes seeming quite self-absorbed, or those kinds of things. Well, if you're saying, like, okay, well, some people are quick to anger, and that is a personality trait.
Yeah.
And people see that as a personality trait. And so when I, was seeing myself as this sort of hysterical girlfriend, that was a stereotype of a caricature of a stereotype of a personality. That then I kind of felt that I fit into.
And you almost give yourself this identity, right?
Yeah.
You're just a crazy girlfriend.
Exactly. And so at what point do you take yourself seriously as someone who is struggling, rather than saying, like...
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's pretty much, like, what my whole talk at TEDx was about. It's that you're not defined by your actions. It's because we go through these periods and our emotions just can override us, and just even, like, a mental illness can make you act in a certain way that's not your true self.
Yeah.
And it's to understand that it's not you, that isn't you, there's more to you than that. Your true self, the person you were before that, is still in there. It just, it's underneath of a blanket or a cloud, and all you've got to do is sieve through those layers and get through to it, and eventually that real version is going to come out again.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. But it's so easy at a time to put all these labels on yourself, but when you do that, you just go into this negative feedback loop, and then it just starts getting worse and worse and worse and worse, doesn't it?
Definitely. And I certainly felt like, for me, diagnosis would have put a line between the two things.
Because that gives you clarity.
Yeah.
The one thing I felt that you were missing was clarity and a focus. Like, if you had depression, you'd be like, I've got depression, there's loads of research on this is what I need to do.
Yeah.
But with what you have, it's so, I've never heard it before, it's so unique and almost like personalised. It's like a concoction of different things that you were struggling with. And it's like, well, which one do I address first? Like, how do I go about this?
Yeah.
So I can see why that would have been a real challenge for you.
Definitely. And it also sort of presents its own challenge in terms of how people are already talking about mental health. Like, we have so much coverage of anxiety and depression, and that's fantastic. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of the time that's because they're really easy to conceptualise.
Yeah.
Because we all feel sad and we all feel nervous. You can picture a really prolonged, like, extreme version of those emotions. That's kind of so easy to conceptualise as like a neurotypical person. But to try and think of, okay, well, yeah, but like literally those shoes didn't fit you and you just had like a meltdown. How can you imagine that as a person who doesn't experience it?
So what actually happened with that?
So, my mum bought me a new pair of shoes. She like offered to buy me a new pair of shoes. I looked some stuff up, chose a pair I really wanted, and they arrived and I put them on and they didn't feel comfortable. They were like, not even actually physically too small, but when your toes feel like they don't have enough space and you're suddenly quite aware of your toes. Yeah. I had that feeling and I was like, no, that's it. Like, I've wasted all this money on these shoes. My mum was trying to do something nice for me. I've ruined it. I bought the wrong ones, and like it just spirals and spirals and spirals to this point where, like, I felt like I basically bankrupted my mum by asking her to spend £30 on a new pair of shoes for me, or I felt like anything good that somebody was trying to do for me, I would like instantly tarnish, and it just gets into that sort of. It goes from something very specific to then being generalised to your entire worldview. And so it creates this sort of... Nobody sees that process. Nobody sees all the steps that it takes to get to this point where you're saying, okay, these shoes don't fit, so I am a burden on everyone around me. It just doesn't make sense until you've been through those steps. And I mean, the steps don't make sense. Like, the whole point of it is that it's irrational. Yeah. But it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, and have you read the book Reasons to Stay Alive by Matt Haig?
I haven't.
Oh, it's a really good book. It's incredible. And he is not shoes, obviously, because that's very unique to yourself, but he talks about that when he was really depressed, like, he struggled to even step outside of his house. He struggled to do day-to-day things, like go to the shop and ask the counter and ask for, like, sweets or something. Then he ran home because he was so scared and so nervous. And I think the most challenging thing is, from an outsider's perspective, is to understand that. It's like, for me, when I first heard that, I couldn't understand someone going into such a panic just because they couldn't put their shoes on. Yeah. And that's quite a difficult thing to articulate and go through, and it's not the shoes. No. That's got nothing to do with it. Yeah. It's the thing that makes you feel, and it's the guilt and the anxiety, and it kind of spirals off onto there. Yeah. And we need to, I think the key thing is making people know that, like, it's not weird. That's not you being weird. That's like you. That's like you going through an experience that people need to understand, and that's not you. You were just unwell at the time. Yeah. And we don't see that.
Definitely not.
Because if you just saw someone in the shop, they're like, oh, who's that strange girl? Like, what is she doing? And because I think it also falls onto the point that we're too quick to judge.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're very easy. We put labels on people far too quickly, without even thinking about what might be going on underneath. So I think the key lesson in that is just like, when you see someone doing something maybe slightly out of character, don't judge them based on that one action. Like, try to put yourself literally in their shoes and try to understand what they're going through. And I think if people can do that and we don't judge quickly, I think there'd be massive changes in just the perception of what mental health is.
And if people could do that for themselves as well.
100%. And that was my conversation with Emily Long. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd be really interested to find out the one thing that you took away from that conversation. So if you could please write that in the comments below, I'd really appreciate it, and I'll get straight back to you. But like I said before, this is only part 1, and I'll be posting part 2 next week. So if you want to be notified for that, please do subscribe. But in the meantime, follow Emily on all social media channels, which I'll link in the description below. And I will see you for part 2 of my conversation with Emily Long next week.